The year is 1966, in many ways a milestone year, both in terms of comic book adaptations on TV and the beginnings of some comic book YouTubers. Well, one in particular. We're going to take a look at the top books on the CGC census count for 1966. Up next on this video from Bronzeville Comics. Hello, panelologists. This is Jim from Bronzeville Comics coming to you with another video. Before we get started, like, comment, subscribe. Check out the description of this video for links to my Instagram, my Whatnot, my eBay store, and my email. So we are well into, this is, I think, episode 33 of this series. We're going year by year through the top books on the CGC census count. Now, we're going the top books in terms of blue labels. And we're using cgcdata.com, which is a great resource if you want to know what books are out there and how many are graded, what grades. So we're going to talk about all of that in 1966. Will DC break back into the top 10? They haven't had a book in the top 10 since 1961. We look at the top 10 books, we count those down. Then we also make sure we cover the top 10 books from both Marvel and DC, as well as other key first appearances, other key issues, and the top most submitted books from each publisher. Now we're going to get into some publishers we haven't seen before, some interesting things, and things I know little about. So if you can enhance your knowledge of a particular unusual title that we highlight, feel free to do so in the comments. That's always appreciated, and I'm sure other people who are watching this video appreciate that as well. So I get some really good feedback on this. We're looking forward to it. Let's start our journey with number 10 on the census. And coming in at number 10 is Amazing Spider-Man number 33 by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. This is a classic cover, and it is this storyline in which Spider-Man discovers that he has more strength than he thought he did by being able to lift himself out of this building that's collapsed on him and water's leaking in. A classic. But there's something else that's a little bit different that's putting this in the top 10, and we will return to it later on in the list in just a little bit. At any rate, this particular book has a census count of 2,906. At number 9 on our list is Fantastic Four, number 46. This is the first full appearance of Black Bolt. In the previous issue from 1965, we had the first appearance of the Inhumans. And at this point in time, 65, 66, 67, there's really a big creative burst from Lee and Kirby. New characters that would become important for Marvel Comics for years to come in the Fantastic Four title here. So we might notice a little bit of a pattern. You might be able to guess about some other books that might make the list. This is the January book from 1966, and it features this great Jack Kirby cover featuring Black Bolt prominently. Of course, we've already seen him come and go in the MCU, but the Inhumans have had their own series over the years and had their own not-so-well-received television series. But this particular book has a total census count of 3,034. Number 8 on the list is Amazing Spider-Man number 40, Stan Lee and John Romita Sr. This is the second issue done by John Romita Sr., and it is this two-parter, this battle between Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. I'm going to comment on it with number 7 on the list, because the issue number 40 has a census count of 3,703. That's just one behind issue number 39, which has a census count of 3,704. This is Amazing Spider-Man number 39, the first issue on which John Romita Sr. Did the pencils. Steve Ditko had a falling out with Stan Lee and Marvel and went over and did some other work that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the list. This particular book also features, we find out that Green Goblin is indeed Norman Osborn, and both Peter and Norman discover each other's identities. Listen, the fact of the matter is that this title was able to transition from Ditko, who is so important, creating so many classic characters and classic storylines, including Spider-Man, right to John Romita without missing a beat. And again, a lot of great characters were created early on here in Romita's run. So this, as I said, this has a census count 3,704. Coming in at number 6 on the list, finally, we get a DC book back in the top 10, and this is Batman number 181, and it is the first appearance of Poison Ivy. This classic cover by Carmine Infantino, very difficult to get in high grade. That red color does rub off pretty easily. And the other thing that holds this book back, and it's kind of surprising that it had this many Universal Blue Label copies, is this book had a centerfold pinup. The centerfold of the book, if you hold it kind of almost like a gentleman's magazine centerfold, has Batman and Robin, and that was often removed from the book. There are hundreds of copies. I don't have the number right in front of me, of these books that are green labels because they're missing the centerfold. So if you do buy a raw one, you do have to make sure it has a centerfold. It's not the only DC book that had a centerfold around this time. But even with that, the census count, Poison Ivy, again, a classic character. One of the few Batman rogues galleries that was introduced in the Silver Age. A lot of the other Batman keys, first appearances, Penguin, Riddler, Scarecrow, etc., are the first Silver Age appearance of those characters. Poison Ivy, a new character created here in 1966. Oddly, even though she was created in 66, never used in the television series. And we will talk about that a little bit more. This has a total of 3,741 Blue Label copies on the census. Coming in at number 5 on the list is Fantastic Four number 50. This is the third part of the Silver Surfer Galactus trilogy. And of course, it has that added importance, which everybody is clamoring for, of Johnny goes off to college, which results in the first appearance of Wyatt Wingfoot, a minor character. But this is collected heavily with the other 2 books in the trilogy. We'll talk about those very briefly, very soon. This particular book has a census count of 4,332. Coming in at number 4 on the list, Amazing Spider-Man number 41, the first appearance of the Rhino. John Romita Sr. artwork, along with, of course, a Stan Lee story. Rhino's been used twice in the movies, both times very briefly. But is a major Spider-Man villain. And this particular book comes in with a census count of 4,766. Number 3 on the list is Fantastic Four number 49, the first full appearance of Galactus and the first cover appearance of both Galactus and the Silver Surfer. The second part of the 3-part trilogy. Of course, we're getting Galactus coming to the MCU and Fantastic Four First Steps in just a couple of months from now. A very sought-after book, a hard book to get in high grade, because of that black on the cover. This gets on the list with a census count of 6,288. Number 2 on the list is Fantastic Four number 52, the first appearance of T'Challa the Black Panther. And really the first major black character in comic books, the first major superhero. And we will touch upon that idea in a couple of other things that we're going to talk about in this series. This particular book, of course, Black Panther movie franchise, and I've said this before on the channel, the one thing that's interesting about Black Panther, right, he was a B-list character, right, had his own title sometimes, did get his own title in the 70s, had his own title at other times. But then the movie propelled him to superstardom. And you have to remember, when that movie came out, there were kids dressing up as Black Panther for Halloween. He became very much a part of the mainstream. Everybody knows who Black Panther is, even if you don't know anything about comic books. he is now one of the most popular superheroes that there is. And probably at this point in time, and it might change in a couple of months, he probably is better known to the public at large than the members of the Fantastic Four. This particular book has a census count of 6,959. Number one. What's the number one book from 1966? I'm sure you've guessed it by now. It is Fantastic Four number 48, the first appearance of the Silver Surfer and the first cameo appearance of Galactus. Classic book, sought after by collectors, a high demand for this book, a high supply for this book. So 6,959 copies of FF52. There are 8,919 copies, almost 2,000 copies more of Fantastic Four 48. In addition, this also has the most restored copies of 362, but there are a total of 45 9.8s of this on the census. Most of the other books in the top 10 have less than 10 books at 9.8, except for Amazing Spider-Man 33, which has 54. There are a couple of other books with a large, there's a Thor, I think it's Thor 133. The first Ego of the Living Planet has a lot of 9.8s, and so does a random issue of Rawhide Kid. So and I haven't been able to find anything that verifies this, but the story that's gone around for years is that there was a warehouse find of these books. And it might not have been like an entire warehouse. I mean, basically, if somebody got a box of 50 or 100 of them, that's enough to change that were untouched. That's enough to change the census count remarkably. But there's probably, I mean, you'd have to think that there's 2,000 more than the next book on the list, which is the same title and just 4 months later. So there shouldn't have been a large difference in the number of copies printed of Fantastic Four 48 and Fantastic Four 52, or number 49 for that matter. But there are so many more copies on the census, and it's not as though I don't think there's a huge difference in the desirability to collect the first appearance of Black Panther versus Silver Surfer, right? If you're a Marvel fan, you know, that's kind of a staple of a collection. But again, 45 9.8s is significantly higher than the percentage of 9.8s of other books, unless you're talking about smaller publishers that had file copies, that sort of thing. So I do tend to think there were a handful of books that, like, for some reason were never distributed. They were in a box somewhere for decades and somebody discovered them. So, but I don't have any evidence of that. If you have, like, verifiable evidence other than just hearing other YouTubers talk about it, let me know in the comments below. So that's going to be it for our top 10. We cap it off with the Silver Surfer. Well, let's go to numbers outside the top 10, other keys. Now, since there was one DC book on the list, to get the 10th book, Marvel book, we have to go to number 11, which is Amazing Spider-Man number 42, the fourth book that John Romita, the fifth book that John Romita Sr. worked on. This is the cameo on the last page of Mary Jane Watson, the Face It Tiger, You Hit the Jackpot panel. That's what makes this one collectible. I think it would have cracked it to the top 10 if it hadn't been for a lot of fairly high-grade copies of Amazing Spider-Man 33. This comes in at number 11 on the list of 2,416. We talk about other keys. Amazing Spider-Man 43, the last issue from 1966. This has the first full appearance of Mary Jane Watson, has the second appearance of the Rhino, Lee and Romita. This has a census count of 2,394. So essentially the top 13 books, other than the Poison Ivy book, are all Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, which I'm pretty sure are Marvel's two best sellers at the time. What else is out there? Let's go to number 19 on the list, and this is Thor, number 134, Lee Kirby, first appearance of the High Evolutionary. We saw him in the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. He's still around. I'm sure that him being the main antagonist of that film boosted the number of copies that ended up being submitted. This has a census count of 1,827. Another key book, 23rd on the list, is Daredevil number 16. This is the first crossover between Spider-Man and Daredevil. And it's also the first time that John Romita Sr. did artwork of Spider-Man. He was doing the Daredevil title at the time. This is May of 1966. 3 months later, he'd be jumping onto Amazing Spider-Man. So it's essentially that this book was a tryout for that. And that's kind of the key significance here. This has a census count of 1,551. The second DC book on the list is another Batman villain appearance. This is the first Silver Age appearance, oddly, of Catwoman in Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane number 70. Now, Catwoman went away after Comics Code Authority was instituted. The unlabeled relationship between Batman and Catwoman kind of ran afoul of the early days of the Comics Code Authority because we weren't quite sure what to make of it. So she was kind of put to the background. They brought in a romantic interest of Batwoman. And other than the Joker, essentially, most of the Batman's villains from the Golden Age would go into mothballs for a while. And as a matter of fact, a lot of them, including the Joker, would go into mothballs in the late 1960s again. Because when O'Neill and Adams took over the series, they tried to get away from the campier aspects of the 1966 TV series. And that's what's important about Batman. And this is very interesting as well. The TV series premiered in January of 1966 with Adam West, Burt Ward, Frank Gorshin portraying the Riddler in basically an adaptation of Batman 171, which got Frank Gorshin an Emmy nomination. It was a massive hit. It was a pop culture phenomenon. Think about how popular it was. The series premiered in January of 1966. By the summer of 1966, there was a full-length theatrical film based on the TV series. And it was Batmania. Catwoman, who hadn't appeared in the comics, I think since 1954, 55, I don't know the exact date off the top of my head, was portrayed by Julie Newmar in the first 2 seasons, but not in the movie. Lee Merriweather played her in the movie. Was a mainstay of the TV series, and she hadn't appeared in the comic books in years. And I have to think that because this particular issue is cover dated November 1966, which means it didn't come out until probably August or September after that full first season, which was really a half season of the TV series and the movie. So Catwoman was on the small screen, on the big screen, before she made her reappearance in comic books here. And oddly, it's in the Lois Lane book. So this particular book has a census count of 1,483. The top X-Men book for the year is X-Men number 19, the first appearance of Mimic, a mutant who can mimic the powers of the other X-Men. We see him here with wings, a Cyclops visor, and big beast feet. And I guess he's making ice under his feet on the telephone line or whatever that is. This is Stan Lee's story. Jack Kirby did the cover along with Werner Roth and Dick Ayers, but Werner Roth was doing the interior art at the time. And really the creativity output in X-Men declined at this point in time. And X-Men, it did struggle along for quite a while, was all but canceled, ended up doing reprints up until Giant Size X-Men number 1. But at any rate, this has a census count of 1,375. Let's go back to DC, and it is Teen Titans number 1, the first of their ongoing series by Bob Haney and Nick Cardy. Nick Cardy, a cover artist especially, a lot of people go after. This isn't one of his better covers. It is a little silly looking. But after 3 tryout issues in Brave and the Bold and Showcase, the Teen Titans got their own title. This would last until 1973, I believe. Was canceled, came back for a little bit later on in the 70s for a handful of issues, and then was canceled again. It was rebooted with New Teen Titans in 1980. But the Teen Titans, a sidekick superhero team. Nick Cardy did a lot of the art on this, and he is a popular artist. I think there's more and more momentum on the collecting the Teen Titans titles. A lot of it because of the Nick Cardy art, to be quite honest. And so this is one of the books that pops. It's the first issue, and it's still pretty early in the Silver Age, early 1966. This has a total census count of 970. Next book on the list is Showcase number 60, another DC book. This is the first Silver Age appearance of the Spectre. The Spectre made his debut in More Fun Comics in 1940 and was a founding member of the Justice Society of America. Didn't last too long as a JSA member, and eventually his feature in More Fun disappeared, but not without some iconic covers by Bernard Bailey. And then he was brought back here. He didn't make an appearance in the early Justice Society crossovers, either with the Justice League or their appearance in the Flash crossovers. A near omnipotent being, had played a big role in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and is a character that DC, the number of series over the years, there was a Silver Age series a few years later with a lot of Neil Adams artwork that is well sought after by collectors. This particular book has a census count of 911. I'm going to go back to Marvel for a second, and we're going to talk about Amazing Spider-Man #1, the Golden Record reprint. Now, back in the day, before TikTok and all that sort of stuff you kids have today, one of the ways that children amused themselves, or were amused, was by playing a phonograph, a record player. Kids now know that the vinyl is a big thing now, getting back onto turntables. But back then it was a record player, and I had like a kid's one that played 45s, didn't play LPs. And I don't remember the exact one, I might have had the Planet of the Apes one. There were a number of them. There was a whole series in the 70s again, which was basically a storybook or a comic book, along with the recording of it on the record. So you could play the record and follow the story along. There were 4 of these that were put out by Golden Record at the time. All reprints: Amazing Spider-Man 1, Fantastic Four 1, Avengers 4, and Journey into Mystery 83. The first tell is that this does not have an issue number or a 12-cent price sticker on it. The other thing is it's thinner. I think it's only 16 pages. And the inside front cover is where the story starts. And on the back cover, it lists all the other Golden Records. So this is a nice place filler for collectors who really can't afford quite now an Amazing Spider-Man #1. So and they're all fairly close. This has the largest census count of all the Golden Record reprints. This one has 838. Next is another DC book, Aquaman #29, the first appearance of Ocean Master, Aquaman's half-brother. This is a Bob Haney story and Nick Cardy cover and art. Nick Cardy also did a lot of Aquaman covers around this time. And it's just about this time he's starting to hit his stride. Ocean Master, one of the main antagonists of Aquaman. I place him behind Black Manta because of what Black Manta did to Aquaman. Basically killed his son. And Patrick Wilson played Ocean Master Orm in the Aquaman movies. There was a little bit of hype around this book leading up to that, but it's still a nice villain key that comes in with a census count of 695. Let's take a little bit of a break to another publisher, Charlton Comics. Captain Atom 83, the first appearance of the second Blue Beetle, Ted Kord, with art by Steve Ditko. So Steve Ditko left Marvel, went back to Charlton. He had created Captain Atom in 1960, and then he also created the Blue Beetle. And Charlton, and we'll see this with some other publishers, decided to get into the superhero game, right? This was a big thing at this time. People had seen the success that Marvel had and jumped on the bandwagon, just as they did with Pre-Kodar in the 50s and war books. And, whatever the fad is, whatever's successful, people will copy it. Charlton's superhero line didn't last for that long, a little more than 2 years. But this being the first appearance of the Blue Beetle, he was not the Blue Beetle featured in the film. That was the third Blue Beetle, Jaime Reyes, but he was alluded to in the narrative. I'd love to see him. DC acquired these characters in the mid-1980s, first used them in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and then Alan Moore's intent was to use them in the story that eventually became The Watchmen. So what he did was he had essentially doppelgangers, approximations of each of these characters. Captain Atom became Dr. Manhattan. Blue Beetle became Night Owl. And you can see the similarities. There's kind of, I always look at Blue Beetle's a little bit of a cross between Spider-Man and Batman. He has the tech and he has the money like Batman, but since he's drawn by Ditko, he has the swinging and the maneuvers and the kind of body flexibility and the wisecracking of Spider-Man. This particular book has a census count of 546. Let's keep going down the list from DC. It's Action Comics number 340, the first appearance of the Parasite. We do have a Kurt Swan cover here. Parasite was a guy who, through an accident, is able to absorb energy, including energy from Superman, which kind of lets him go toe-to-toe with the Man of Steel. This particular book has a census count of 519. This is 77th on the list. It's Batman number 186. This is the first appearance of Gaggy the Clown, the Joker's sidekick, who really didn't appear for years after this. He was reimagined, I think, in the New 52 run, and we've seen a little bit of him since then, but Gaggy wasn't used much in the rest of the Silver, Bronze, Copper Age. But this has elevated that to a key. There's a census count of 467. We're staying with Batman. Batman issue number 183, second appearance of Poison Ivy. And, of course, on the cover, Batman's watching himself on TV. No, not tonight, kid. I'm staying in the Batcave to watch myself on television. So this has a cover date of August 1966, which meant it came out probably about May, right? And so, again, the Batman TV series, Batmania was in full swing. And this leads into that. So it did have quite an effect, right? Marvel comes out with all these superhero titles, about 4 years prior. At this point in time, other publishers saying, hey, let's get into this superhero game. Batman is a superhero on TV and is causing quite the sensation. And it would change a little bit, right? How comics were perceived. It was the campiness, which in a few short years, the writers and artists kind of wanted to remove themselves from in large measure. And that's what would, be a big change for Batman. And also, I think that helped usher in a little bit more maturity in storyline. There are other factors involved, as we'll talk about as we go along with other keys in upcoming years. The next book on the list is Batman number 179. This is the second Silver Age appearance of the Riddler. Of course, Frank Gorshin's portrayal of him in the TV series put the Riddler into A-list territory. Riddler only had a couple of appearances in the Golden Age. Was really an afterthought of a villain, but I do believe that the TV show propelled him. Now, Frank Gorshin did that first episode. And then Riddler was one of the 4 villains that was in the movie that came out in the summer of 1966, along with Penguin, Joker, and Catwoman, who at the time you would probably have named as Batman's biggest villains, or especially from the Golden Age. And so, again, Riddler steps up into that status with them. And he's continued to be portrayed over the years. Tommy Lee Jones and Paul Dano is a major Batman villain. Let's go to the next DC book on the list, and this is Plastic Man number 1, with an Arnold Drake story and Gil Kane cover and art of all things. This is the first appearance of No, I'm not going to say that. Well, it's the first appearance of this Plastic Man, right? So Plastic Man's a little bit convoluted, especially at this point in time. He made his first appearance of Police Comics, a Quality Comics publication by Jack Cole back in 1940. Quality Comics went out of business and sold their characters to DC in 1956. DC and Plastic Man was still being published as a quality comic at the time, but it wasn't one of the ones that made the transition. Black Hawk, Robin Hood, which was quickly canceled, G.I. Combat, and Heartthrobs, a romance book, were the ones that DC continued to publish. And as a matter of fact, when Elongated Man was created for the Flash series, the creators and the editor didn't know that DC had the rights to Plastic Man, who essentially they were copying. He also predates Reed Richards. This particular Plastic Man, though, is the son of the original Plastic Man, but it's not in the DC continuity. They eventually put it on what they called Earth 12, which is where a lot of their sillier 60s characters were largely put, including the Inferior Five and the Mad Mod and, the Bob Hope adaptations, Jerry Lewis adaptations, all that crazy stuff. This ran for 10 issues. It was canceled, came back in the 70s for another 10 issues. Plastic Man did have an animated series I think it was in 1981, a Saturday morning cartoon series of Plastic Man. Never been in live action yet. I think it's coming. The only thing that makes me think they're going to be a little bit hesitant is that, Mr. Fantastic's just coming out. They have similar powers. Although Plastic Man's powers, honestly, are a little more versatile because he changes his shape into almost anything. He can't change his appearance, but he can change his shape. So he's like a mailbox, but the mailbox looks like the Plastic Man costume. This particular book has a census count of 379. We're going to go back to Charlton and another now extremely popular character. And this is Fightin' 5, number 40, the first appearance of Peacemaker, Christopher Smith. We just saw the trailer for Peacemaker Season 2. He's been portrayed by John Cena in the Suicide Squad film as well as in Peacemaker Season 1. This is a Charlton war book, so there aren't a lot of those. And the thing with these Charlton books, one of the things that's a little frustrating is it's really hard to find the issue number. In that red triangle in the top left corner, it's in the bottom corner of the triangle. And if the book is miswrapped a little bit, it's like on the spine. And it's a really small font, so you have to be able to recognize the cover itself, not the number. And again, Peacemaker was a nothing burger of a character, 4 or 5 years ago. Now he's risen to prominence because of largely his appearance in the movie and then the TV series. So this particular book, harder to find book, especially in high grade, 263 copies on the census. Another DC book, this is Adventure Comics number 346. This is the first appearance of 4 new Legionnaires. The Legion of Superheroes were the headliners in Adventure Comics at this time. And we can see them standing there: Karate Kid, Princess Projectra, Feral Lad, and Nemesis Kid. Nemesis Kid ended up betraying them and being a villain. But Feral Lad, and I alluded to this with the Black Panther. Now, Jim Shooter had mentioned, this is also the first time that Jim Shooter wrote a story for the comics at 14 years old. He had basically submitted a script to, I think Mort Weisinger was still the editor at the time, and not knowing how old he was, Weisinger hired him. And he was writing Legion of Superheroes around this time. Did have some really awesome Legion stories and kind of redefined a little bit of their mythos. But it was also kind of interesting because you have this juxtaposition between a 14-year-old kid writing a book about teenage superheroes and then Teen Titans, a middle-aged man writing a book about teenage superheroes, and him imagining what teenagers would say. Pretty campy on the Teen Titans side, less so in the Legion. Now, what I was talking about was, and we talked about Black Panther and the early use of being one of the first black superheroes, right? I think Black Panther is the first black superhero in comic books. Feral Lad is never seen. He has this full mask on. And he did change the story later on, but there was a published story by Shooter in which he said his intent was for Feral Lad to be black and to be unmasked. DC, Weisinger said, we don't want to lose our distribution in the South. Remember, it's 1966, right? It's just 2 years after the Civil Rights Act. And so, prominent African Americans are having a hard time, especially in the American South, right? Baseball players are still staying, with the minor leagues still not being allowed in certain hotels, and obviously other murders and whatnot and lynchings in the South. But Shooter's intent was him to be unmasked and be black. When they said, no, you can't make him black, Shooter's like, okay, I'll kill him. And Feral Lad died several issues later, and really, because the Legion's been so rebooted, he didn't really come back full-time. But this particular book has a census count of 205. Let's go to the top book from Warren. This is a magazine, Eerie number 2. This is the first magazine-sized issue of Eerie with a Frank Frazetta cover, which makes it very desirable. These early Warren horror books there's a certain collector base that really wants them. They're very popular. Not that easy to find at high grade. This particular book has a census count of 197. Speaking of Plastic Man, this is a quasi-first appearance. This is House of Mystery number 160. Now, the lead feature in House of Mystery this time was, as you see on the cover, Dial H for Hero. Robbie Reed was a kid who could change into 1,000 superheroes. He found this alien device that had the letters HERO and a dial. And when he dialed them in that order, he could change into a different superhero, like we see on the cover, Giant Boy or King Candy or Plastic Man. And most of the heroes that he changed into were submissions by fans, the kids at the time. They would draw a costume and give the character a name and maybe some power, send it into the letters column. They'd say, oh, King Candy, that's a great idea for a character. But Robbie Reed here changes into Plastic Man. This isn't really Plastic Man. It's sort of like when the Acrobat became Captain America, or there's an issue where Batman dresses up as Two-Face. But it is... The notes say first Silver Age appearance of Plastic Man. It's not really him. Census count of 187. King Feature Syndicate. King Feature Syndicate was a newspaper syndicate that came out of the William Randolph Hearst Empire. And one of the things they did was they had a series of comic strips that they would sell to independent local newspapers. One of the big things about reading newspapers when they still existed at the time was the comics page, the funny page, especially on Sundays where it would be covered, be a wraparound, but there'd be comic strips every day, humor as well as action. And some of these characters that were created during the pulps, like Flash Gordon, like Mandrake the Magician, the Phantom, King Feature Syndicate also had Popeye and a couple of other humor titles that they were publishing at the time, but they went in with these heroes, which are similar to superheroes, similar enough that they try to capitalize on the success. And the this ran for 37 issues on and off into the 1970s. Eventually, the comics that King Feature Syndicate published, they sold some properties off to Charlton, some to Gold Key, some to Dell. This, I think, went to Gold Key. And it kind of finished. Issues came out after the 1979 movie, Flash Gordon. Anyway, census count of 173. Similarly, this is the top book from Gold Key, and it's Doc Savage #1. Doc Savage was a pulp creation, a man who I think his father had given him a serum that gave him this bronze, kind of metallic, tough skin. He is a precursor to Superman and a lot of other superheroes, these pulp heroes. And he's been published in the comics on and off for decades. Sometimes Marvel would publish a series, sometimes it would be DC, sometimes independent, back to DC. But there are a lot of Doc Savage books out there. And as a matter of fact, I tell a story. When DC was publishing a Doc Savage series in the late 1980s, I wrote a letter to the editor. And back then in the letters page, they doxed you, right? They gave your home address. Now, I used a pseudonym, but still... a mailing came to that pseudonym at my home address, and it was from somebody starting a fanzine. It was basically a 8.5 by 11 piece of copy paper that had been photocopied with the first issue of a Doc Savage fanzine, and this guy was trying to get people who would subscribe to his fanzine. It did last for several years, and evidently it's all the issues are sought after by collectors, and #1 isn't easy to find. I had found it in a box that had been like in storage forever with other comic book stuff like, catalogs from different back issue publishers in the days before the internet. And I put it on eBay for buy it now for $50, and it went like in minutes. I guess there were enough. This guy had it saved in his phone, and he didn't care about the value. He just wanted it. So, something I didn't really think had any value evidently had some. So anyway, Doc Savage #1 has a census count of 132. Let's go back to DC briefly. A war book. This is Our Army at War #168, the first appearance of the Unknown Soldier, who would be a major character, get his own book later. Would be in Star Spangled War Stories, and then that transitioned into his own book later in the 1970s, and was a major character in DC's war book. This is a Joe Kubert cover. He also did the interior art with Robert Kanigher doing the story, and this has a census count of 129. Next on the list is the top book from Harvey Publications, and this is Spy-Man #1. Spy-Man, again, Harvey now, let's jump into superheroes. Let's create our own superheroes. We have Spy-Man. Spy-Man was a guy that lost his hand in some sort of atomic accident, and he got this robot hand, which was essentially a Swiss Army knife of a hand, and he could replace the fingers with different things. So he had like a blaster, an X-ray, a recorder, a magnet, a camera, a batarang, a comb. Who knows what he had in there? Only lasted 3 issues, but what makes this significant, this book, is not so much the first appearance of Spy-Man, because there aren't that many people who are big Spy-Man fans, but this is the first published artwork by Jim Steranko. And you can see the copy I pulled up here, signed by Steranko. He's still around, still does a lot of shows. So if you do have a Spy-Man #1 and you can get to a show that Steranko's at, you can get it signed. This has 98 blue label copies on the Census. It has nearly as many Signature Series yellow label copies, because it's Steranko, not Spy-Man, that makes this book important. Let's go to the top book from Dell. And this is Lobo #2. Second issue, final issue of the series. Lobo #1 made our list last year. And this is the first comic book to feature as the title character an African-American character. Lobo, an Old West gunfighter. This is a Don Amison story and Tony Tallarico cover and art. Again, it only lasted these 2 issues. I imagine that distribution problems in the South probably led to it being canceled. So this has a census count of 91. Going back to Harvey, and it's Fighting American #1, which included art by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. I think there's some new artwork in this. It does have 1-page ad by Neil Adams. Fighting American was a character that Simon and Kirby created in the 1950s, I believe. Harvey got the rights here, and another superhero that's getting out. I think this only lasted 2 issues, 87 copies on the Census. Up next, this is also from Dell. This is Doctor Who and the Daleks, no number. This is the first appearance of Doctor Who in comics. Here he's played by Peter Cushing. Younger viewers, but not that much younger, but yeah, pretty much everybody may remember Peter Cushing for his portrayal of Grand Moff Tarkin in Star Wars. Here he's the first Doctor. I believe this is the first Doctor. This particular book is based on a movie that came out at the time, which is the first Doctor Who movie. Kind of fun. They referenced it in an episode last season about him and his niece or granddaughter, I think she is here. So the movie's kind of a fun watch, if you like kind of retro 60s sci-fi, and and if you like Peter Cushing. But this is a little bit harder to find book, and it's Whovians will seek it out. I do have a copy that I have to get graded. There are 85 copies on the Census. The next book up is also from Harvey, another Golden Age superhero brought back, and this is The Spirit #1 by Will Eisner. He did the interiors as well as the cover art. He did some new material, and there were some reprints of the Sunday strips from 1940 and 1948 in this book. Again, this only lasted 2 issues, and there are 61 copies on the Census. Another publisher, Tower Comics. This was Wally Wood's creation, the Thunder Agents. He went off and created his own superheroes. This ran for 20 issues, and there were some spin-offs of a couple of the characters, No Man and Dynamo. Issue #1 made the list last year. Issue 2 makes the list this year. Again, another publisher, another set of superheroes, 54 copies on the Census. The next one is an interesting book, and I kind of alluded to it. We talked about the Civil Rights Act. This is the Great Society comic book. Now, the Great Society was a term that Lyndon Johnson used in his campaign to retain the presidency. I won't say re-election because he was elected as vice president. Anyway, he was the guy that was vice president for JFK, took over. Characters based on Robert and Teddy Kennedy appear in this as superheroes. And this is by the same folks who did Lobo, actually. DJ Arneson and Tony Tallarico. It's an underground book. It's from Parallax. It's a satire, but not as biting as a lot of underground books would become in the next several years. You see here, Super LBJ on the cover. Great Society referred to the idea that LBJ put into place with a lot of his legislation. He also controlled very large majorities in both houses of Congress after the 1964 presidential election, and was able to get a lot of things done in terms of equity, education, and social justice. That was what we referred to as the Great Society. This, I have to imagine there are a lot of file copies. There are 28 copies on the census, but the mean grade is 9.13, which is ridiculously high. Let's move on to the next book. This is a fanzine from Go Broke Press. This is The Prophet #1. It is a fanzine. Joel Buck did the book. It's the Alienated War Baby Report. I don't know a lot about this. If you know anything more, you can put in the comments below. I haven't really delved in. I'm not well versed in underground comics from the 60s and 70s, but this particular book has a census count of 24. What about Archie Comics? We haven't heard from them yet. They have 2 books that are tied for their top spot. One is Archie as Pureheart the Powerful. He becomes a superhero here, and that is issue #1 of that series, and that is tied with Jughead as Captain Hero, another kind of superhero parody. Both of these books are tied with census counts of 23. Now, the next book is from the publisher MF Enterprises. This is Captain Marvel #1, and not a Captain Marvel that most people know. This is an android, an alien android. They lost the lawsuit to Marvel and no longer published this. It ran, I believe, 4 issues and 2 offshoot issues. He has some different powers, including the power to separate his limbs. Does this predate Arm Fall Off Boy? I think it does. I have to double check that. But at any rate, Captain Marvel #1, kind of a curio. Again, a small publisher trying to create their own superheroes. This has a census count of 22. What about EC Comics? They come in tied with Captain Marvel #1 with Mad #105, the Batmania cover with Alfred E. Newman as Robin and the Adam West Batman, kind of repulsed by that. This is a special summer camp issue, and the humor that is usually referred to, the style of humor from the Batman TV series, is camp or campy. Of course, a brilliant series, the series that pretty much introduced me to superheroes and got me interested in reading the comic books when I was old enough to read, because I was watching the TV series before I was a reader. Get the action figures, the whole 9 yards, and that leads us to where I am today. I actually just ordered a copy of this, a raw copy, just for fun, because I'm a big Batman 66 fan. I'm a huge Batman 66 fan. That was my childhood. And what was really awesome about it is it's a kind of show that appeals very much to kids. It's colorful, it has action, it's fun. It kind of follows this formula that is comfortable for kids to watch day after day or week after week. So I think my oldest was 4 at the time, where my Christmas present was the Blu-ray box set of the complete series. And we watched it all together, and she loved it as well. And, it was just a great bonding experience to be able to share it with my kid and have them enjoy it the way I enjoyed it. And still is a big fan, and also was kind of the entree to being interested in superheroes. And for years was a total DC fan, didn't want anything to do with Marvel. And then we was old enough around the time Endgame came out to go through the entire library, and haven't been able to stop them since. This has a census count of 22. From American Comics Group, there's a tie for the #1 spot between 2 Herbie books. Issues number 14 and Herbie number 16. Both at this time, he's his own kind of superhero, the Fat Fury. 14 copies on the census. The next book is from ICAS, or Jerry K. This is a fanzine, The Cartoonist. Issue number 1, and it's a Jerry K. cover and art. Ron Foss text story and art. It has other text stories. And it's a fanzine. It's 75 cents. I think that's comic book sized. There are 13 copies on the census, so it ties it with this magazine. This is Wits End #1, which is $1, published by Wally Wood. And we can see Al Williamson, Ralph Reese, Frank Frazetta, Wallace Wood, and Jack Goggin art. This lasted for 13 issues, on and off about once a year on average, maybe twice at most, up until 1985. Also has 13 copies on the Census. We're going to finish it off quickly with two other books. Coming in at 1,542 on the list is Classics Illustrated number 133 from Gilberton. It's a reprint. It's HRN number 167. That means the highest reprint number. On the back of them, they'd be like, you can get these other Classics Illustrated books, and they list all of them. And the highest number was the most recent one that came out. This is 167, so it's 34 issues. At this point, no new material from Gilberton in terms of Classics Illustrated. They will let two other issues come out. In 1969, this has 3 copies on the Census. And from Fawcett, Dennis the Menace Giant number 41, 1 copy on the Census. So thanks for stopping by. I hope you had some fun going through this list as I did creating it and bringing it to you. If you did like my videos, you can take a look at a couple of my other videos here. And this is Jim saying until next time, enjoy your comics.